Now, we spoke a little bit about getting lots and lots of growth on the tree, and they're getting quite full of foliage now. They've just come out of dormancy, as you can see. The new little light green growth is come out of dormancy. This particular tree didn't go fully dormant. It actually still retained a percentage of its growth because it's been fed fairly well during the year and looked after fairly well, so it actually didn't go fully dormant. It is a standard Chinese elm tree. That is a standard Chinese elm tree. All of these are everyday Chinese elm trees. They're not a particular species of elm or subspecies like a catlin or a corky bark or anything like that. They're just standard everyday Chinese elms that you can get from most places. They were grown purposely, styled up from a seedling and styled as a tree. Now, because these trees are starting to get full of foliage, they will very soon start to lose their structured look. And one of the very important things you have to be careful with deciduous trees that you develop this mass ramification on. So if they keep growing, they get so full of foliage that they become a tangled mess, and they look very bad after about 15 years if left to their own devices. So you have to continually thin them out to re-establish your branch structure. I'm going to show you two trees that have been just pruned recently to re-establish their basic branch structure, and now we're going to grow lots of this little twig growth on them. In another 5 years' time they'll need to have that done too. The first one is this little one here. Another Chinese elm tree. This is a root over rock. Can you have a look and see the difference between that? You see the branch structure of that very well now. It's very defined, and you don't really appreciate it until you look over the top of it. So come and have a look at it during the break. You can see the structure of the branch a lot easier than you can see it on here, because this has a lot more foliage on it. So in another year or so, this will have to be cut back to establish the structure of the tree again, so that it doesn't become too crowded, I guess, for want of a better word. This tree and this tree here will grow very differently to the other two. So I'll put them on the turntable and talk to you a little bit about how they're grown. Very simple way for you to grow and propagate trees. There's one there. You see that one's been cut back to establish the ramification. You can see the old sub-branching and branch. That's what the illusion of age looks like on an old deciduous tree. You get that heavy branch structure out here, and you get all your little twig growth come off here. Both of these trees here are root cuttings. Okay, so they've been grown from root pruning and they didn't grow overnight. There's probably 12 years worth of work to get them to look like this, of careful controlling to get the ramification out and get that spread of foliage to get them to look like this. But they were actually grown from roots that were pruned off the tree. So typically, when you prune enough trees, you'll notice that some of the root systems look different to others. Elm trees typically have what we call a very fleshy root system. So it's very thick, pencil pen thickness, lots of big thick roots wrapped around the pot. Some couple of tiny little ones, feeder roots coming up here, but they produce a lot of thick, fleshy roots. And it's a typical characteristic of elm trees, particularly when they're first going through their bonsai culture and getting a proper fibrous root system. What you do is you take one of those thick roots that you like, that's got little sub-roots going off it, and you can cut them off, and you can cut the root up the top here, and you just plant that into good open soil, because I guarantee it'll grow. The success rate would be 90% easily with an elm tree. They are so vigorous and so easy to grow. This particular one here, which is a root over rock, is simply a root cutting taken off a tree I was root pruning at the time, the Chinese elm. This was the root down here. It had a couple of trailer roots here, and it just had the stub up here. That's the root here. I wrapped it around the rock and tied it onto the rock with raffia, and then I buried the whole lot up to here. And I had this much of the root sticking above the soil. So this little bit of the root was sticking above the soil. I grew the tree off the top of the root. It came in, shot out a shoot, and it waited till one of the shoots was facing the direction I want, and I grew the whole top of the tree straight out of the root. So it's just a simple root cutting, and how easy it is with elm trees to grow, because elm trees are probably underrated for how easy they are to grow and how successfully you can grow little trees like this. Now, little trees like this are not necessarily everybody's forte. Now, lots of people like big, chunky trees with big, thick trunks. You've still got to use the same principles to develop ramification. No matter how small or how thick your trunk is, you still need to develop your sub-branching on here, which is out here, this sort of stuff, and then on your sub-branching, all your little twigs, which will give the illusion of ramification. Now, bear in mind, the more foliage you have on the plant, the smaller the leaf size will be. The only negative to that is the more leaf you have on your tree, the more water it uses during summer, because you get a lot of evaporation through the tree being exposed to the ambient temperature, which is the air temperature. So if you've got more leaf growth on the tree, it will use what little bit of water it has in here faster. So you need to be mindful of that. You need to water your trees regularly if they're well ramified. Now, we spoke about the roots. If the tree is ramified here, the root system will be quite well ramified under here. Believe it or not, the root system does ramify. It does shoot off and become quite fibrous and quite shaped like whatever your pot size is. Fibrous, which means little shoots coming off like your sub-branches under here. And the only way to do that is to root prune your tree regularly. Pull your tree out of your pot, inspect its roots, trim it, bring it back, reduce the amount of thick, solid, chunky roots under the soil, and encourage as much fibrous roots as you can, and the tree will be healthier for it. Equally important to that whole equation is extremely open, good quality soil mix. If the soil mix is not open and free draining, the air particles, which are crucial for the roots surviving, will get smaller and smaller and smaller. And the tree won't get oxygen, it won't get water, it won't get nutrients. And before long, the tree becomes very root bound and very impenetrable for water, because the water can't physically get through the structure of the actual soil to wet the roots. In a very root bound tree, what happens is that the soil becomes so dry in here that when you water it, the water runs down the side of the pot and finds its way underneath and either sits on the bottom or drains out. And the root ball inside here stays dry, and the tree doesn't actually get any water at all. You might think you're watering, but in fact you're not. If you pull the tree out and break open the root system, you find the inside of the root system is completely bone dry. And the tree slowly dehydrates. And you think you're doing the right thing, but it's just unpenetrable for the water. In those circumstances, you need to actually soak the tree. You need to get a bucket or a large vessel and put it in water up to here and let the water come up into the pot and come up through and completely saturate the root system. Now, because we've had such horrid summers in the last 5 or 6 years, there would have been lots of trees that would have dried out too much over that period of time, particularly little trees like this, dry out very quickly in summer, which you can imagine. So, if you have good quality root system, root prune your trees regularly, your watering is not an issue for you. The root ball stays wetter and it's easy to re-wet once it dries out. And it gets a lot of oxygen around the root system, and you avoid conditions called root rot, which usually happens if the root system stays too wet too long as well. And it free drains on weather like we've had now. We've had massive amount of rain. You know, it just falls right through there. It doesn't collect in here and sit and pool underneath there and turn the soil sour, which is that rotting mess that it turns into if it stays wet too long. Remember, if the roots are not healthy, the plant will die very quickly. So if you don't look after the roots, all of your work to keep your tree alive is a waste of time. What's under here is more crucial than what's on the top of the here, because if this isn't doing a good job, I tell you now, this will not survive. It will die off, and you'll be scratching your head going, oh, I just lost another tree, don't know why. So be wary. Your soil is crucial. It's one of the most important factors of having good quality bonsai trees. The trees here are deciduous. The reason I brought these deciduous trees in here because they're easy to show what ramification looks like and how well you can get the tree to ramify. And if you look here, you'll see the structure. If you come up and have a look at this tree later on, you'll see it's got the substructure here. Each branch has the substructure and the ramification on here. This tree has to be equally pruned back hard every couple of years, otherwise it will suffer like these. It will become so full of foliage that you can't see the substructure on the branch. One of the illusions of age is being able to see that heavy substructure on the branch. It's being able to see this type of structure underneath the foliage, which gives you the illusion of an old tree. So if you can see some of this structure underneath the foliage, your tree actually looks older. And I could quite easily demonstrate that by letting this grow so much that you can't see the substructure. It actually looks younger than it is, and when you prune the tree back to this hard, it actually, before your eyes, will age up to 10 years, just by physically being able to see this substructure you can see through the foliage pad. So junipers in particular, grow very quickly. This is the most commonly used juniper, squamata. There's a Bacumbens variety too, which is a lot coarser in its needle and a lot sharper. But it's the most widely used bonsai tree probably there because you can make an instant tree from it very, very quickly. But the same thing, you must keep them pruned back so that they don't become too full of foliage and too hard to manage, I guess, as such. So this has been pruned back to actually maintain that look of age, so you can see the substructure in each branch, and actually the whole thing becomes a composition of art. Between this tree and that juniper on the bench there, can you see how you can't really see the branch structure under those heavy foliage pads? And it's so, see how the foliage is so full, you can't actually see where the branches develop themselves under those foliage pads. That's what will happen to junipers, pine trees, etc. If they're not kept pruned well, they lose the ability for you to see the branch structure that's underneath that tree. It looks fantastic in autumn because of the colour that they have. Everybody loves the Japanese maple tree because of the colour that they have. They're hard to keep hold of and keep alive well in certain places in Victoria because they're a little bit more delicate than these elm trees. And what I mean by delicate is they'll actually respond negatively to adverse weather more so than what something like this will. And definitely more so than something like this will. And what I mean by adverse weather is if for instance it gets really hot and it's 40 degrees, this will survive far less than what this will. This will survive so much better than what this will. In fact, if it was ambient temperature was 40 degrees outside, I guarantee every single leaf on this tree would be burnt. Okay? Because it's broadleaf, soft, delicate leaf. They evaporate very quickly, so the water leaves them in the ambient temperature, so the air temperature dries them very quickly, and they scorch and then drop off. One of the biggest advantages of deciduous trees is they'll let you know if they're going to die, far better than what that juniper will. And they let you know that because they simply burn their leaves off. That's the tree's first line of defence, is to drop its leaves and try and cut down on the amount of demand for water out of the soil. So it'll actually, that's why the leaves die off. So you get a second chance with deciduous trees in a lot of cases than what you will with a juniper. You don't water the juniper enough. The first time you realise is when it says I've had enough and it starts to die. And in a lot of cases it's irreversible once it starts to die. They're very hard to get back once they start to die. It's too late in most cases. They're also suitable to different types of problems too, junipers versus maples. Maple like this, aphids love them, caterpillars love them. Junipers like this, spider mite, and insects similar to spider mite love them. And in a lot of cases, you'll get fungus problems too if you're not careful. And unfortunately with squamatas, you don't know until it's too late. They start to go brown, and each part of the tree starts to die for no reason at all. So you've got to be very careful with these types of trees because they don't give you an indication of a disease or a pest problem, whereas these can. You can see a caterpillar on these, you can see aphids on these, you can spray, you can squash, you can hit them with soapy water. There's many ways you can actually protect the tree. So they've both got different pros and cons. Even the humble little elm tree, which is almost bulletproof, is susceptible to mites. And I've seen mites strip these trees bare in a matter of 3 or 4 days. And you won't know you've got them until the leaves start falling off and you go spray for mites. So, brings us back to this tree. What would you do with this tree as far as taking it further from where it is now?